And Dale, Dale's going to join me here. Dale's working as a research assistant on the Teacher Choices in Action module. Do you want to just say hi to everyone, Dale?
Hello, everybody. So nice to be joining you here today. I'm really excited to share with you, and it's been a fantastic day so far.
Cool. So putting LCT to work. So the one thing was about conceptualizing the course and how do we pedagogize practice and how do we enact it. The next thing was about actually the work that the students did for these 4 weeks. You can just imagine 44,000 students working for 4 weeks has generated a huge amount of empirical data that we now have a research project, and we are slowly getting that up and running and analyzing how students think about teaching practice through their teacher training courses. So I want to start with this. Why is it so difficult to observe teaching? And I want you to have a look at this and give me your thoughts about kind of the metaphor that I'm to me, when I saw this, I just thought that's how students observe teaching. Let's just have a look. Any thoughts on why I have showed that clip? Or anything that it meant to you?
Hi Lee, it's Tanusha.
Hi Tanusha.
The first thing that popped in mind is that students often see what we teach being drastically different from what they're tested in exams.
Mm-hmm. Okay, absolutely. So it is recognizing that object, and in the context of student teachers who are now learning to be teachers, very often they've spent 12, 15 years in a classroom, and they come in convinced that all they need is the certificate. They don't need a 4-year degree in order to learn to teach, because actually they know it already. They are familiar with classroom life. They know the work of the teacher, and there's just no, there's nothing new for them to learn. I wonder if that resonates with anybody in your contexts. Is that just a South African thing where students in their first year are convinced they already know? Okay, well,
sorry, Lee, I think for me as well, as you watched the video, it took a long time to move from being a giraffe to an elephant, and a lot of movement. And I think it's exactly the same when student teachers arrive thinking it's a giraffe, and I'm cool with the giraffe. It takes a lot of time, a lot of movement, a lot of shifting to eventually see the elephant at the end of the day.
I think that that's what I really like about the idea of stances and, you know, what you see from a particular stance in space as a knower, because they come into teacher education programs as students who've mastered the school system. But what we're asking them to do is to go back into a very familiar environment, but see it as a completely different animal. And the trick is not to lose sight of the giraffe. It's the ability to see the giraffe and to see the elephant and be able to see both. That I think is the challenge of teacher education, is how do we get the students to actually understand at first that there is this other animal, you know, a familiar environment, but a very unfamiliar practice. So why is it so important that teacher trainees see not just the teacher action, but also the reasons for it? I want to pick up on something that I said a little bit earlier, that our curriculum, our policy, certainly since Schulman's typology of knowledge and the very many others, and the 40 years of work on PCK, has really focused on making sure that students have the teacher knowledge they need. But the teacher knowledge is static. It's how that knowledge is activated in practice that becomes whether they are simply going to perpetuate prevalent practices, whether or not they're effective, or whether they're able to develop a kind of an intentional, informed teaching practice, which is necessary for an education system that is not doing well. Our South African education system, 20% of schools are doing very, very well, and 80% are really, really not struggling. And if we are trying to train professional, knowledgeable teachers for that system, they can't just see teacher action and copy it. They can't just have all this knowledge, but not being able to use that knowledge to inform what they do. And so Carol and I wrote a paper that was published in 2021 about seeing the complexity of teachers' work and the importance of pedagogic reasoning as a logic that underpins work integrated learning. So I'm just going to recap a little about the teacher choices in action module. What we did here was we tried to unpack for them the different logics of how teachers do their work in terms of what's available in the context, how they work with knowledge, how they work with learners doing the work, the choices for making their classroom spaces inclusive of the learner diversity, being able to work both with sameness and with learner difference, the multilingual nature of South African classrooms. And then it's only then that once you get that part right, the knowledge and the learning part right, that the managing the learning environment becomes so much more manageable. The default position is that you teach the students how to manage classrooms first and then teach them with, you know, working with knowledge later. And in our experience, in my context, that has failed dismally all the time. If you get the knowledge part right and the cumulative learning part right, the classroom management becomes so much more easier to navigate. All right, Dale, over to you.
Thank you, Lee. So during the Teacher Choices in Action module, the students moved through the different modules as Lee's taken you through them. And at the end of each of the units, they had to do a lesson observation task, where they watched a video of another teacher teaching, and then they wrote a lesson report. And the data that we are analyzing currently comes from the very first lesson observation that they did, basically before the module began in earnest, and the very, very last one that they did. And crucially, those two lesson observations were on the same lesson. So the rest were on other lessons they could choose, but we told them lesson observation 1 and lesson observation 6 have to be on this particular lesson. Thanks, Lee.
Okay, and I just wanted to acknowledge, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, Lee.
I just want to acknowledge that this lesson comes from Reading to Learn South Africa, who gave us the permission to use this lesson, this just absolutely delightful lesson, in the Teacher Choices in Action module. We thought, again, just like Mr. Wilmot and Ms. Flanagan's teaching artifacts, that this gave a really, really useful model for students to unpack, to analyze, and to comment on.
Thanks, Lee. And so obviously in moving from the very first lesson observation to the very last lesson observation, controlling the video that that they responded to, we were wanting to see the development, the changes in how the students observed teacher thinking. Could they pick it out? Did they see why? Where was the growth? Thanks, Lee.
And I think that also picks up something Carl said in his keynote this morning, that LCT is about change, it's about movement, it's about time. And so what we were really looking here is changes over time. Thanks, Dale. Yeah,
absolutely. And so in order to kind of scaffold the students in their lesson observations, we gave them a set of writing prompts, which actually has proven to be very useful in the analysis, because we kind of have apples and apples to compare. We asked them to describe the lesson in general, what did they see, and so forth. And then we asked them to start with the analysis by asking them to describe and make account for who the teacher is teaching, where they're teaching, and what they're teaching. And then they could end their lesson report with their general comments, or how they felt about the lesson. Was it good? Why not? And so on and so forth. So the lesson that the students responded to was a grade 7 lesson on peer pressure within the kind of life skills, personal development area of the school curriculum.
Yeah, and we're particularly interested to see how much of the reasoning, the choices in action they're seeing over time, just to re-emphasize that point. So to do this, we drew on then LCT again. How do the students, the student teachers, look at teachers as knowers who are using contextual knowledge of their pedagogy, knowledge of their subject, knowledge of the learners to enact their teaching practice? And the theory the tool that we thought out of the LCT toolkit that was most useful is the strength of semantic density, which is the complexity, how simple or how complex their lesson observations are.
So in order to obviously make sense of all of this data, and as Lee said, it's a massive amount of data, we knew that our conceptual framework was about teaching as reasoned action, about pedagogic reasoning, that teaching is deliberate and requires a deliberate set of choices to enable learning to happen. And we knew that we needed to see what that reasoned action looked like in the real world data that we collected from the students. So we needed to make that connection, all right? But also we needed to ensure that the data adequately described the ideas from the conceptual framework. So not only does the theory need to be exemplified in the data, but the data needs to give us examples of the theory. And I always talk about this as a bit of a back and forth tango, just like a tango dance goes backwards and forwards. Lee and I think we must have had about 35 drafts of a translation device, to the point where when my phone would ring, my heart would sink because I knew a change was coming. I'm just teasing. And it was just, we knew we wanted to use semantic density, we wanted to find complexity, we knew we wanted to look at pedagogic reasoning, but to make this device that captured adequately the nuance of the data and all the parts of the theory that we were really interested in took a lot of this backwards and forwards.
Okay, so what we want to do is just to show you how we operationalized semantic density to look at the complexity of how teacher trainees see teachers' work. And then we're going to look at some empirical examples. So at the most simple, we found examples where the teacher's work is not mentioned at all. So for example, during this lesson, teachers work with a reading. Okay, the teacher is completely absent as a role player or as a stakeholder. So we coded that as the simplest way that teacher trainees observe teachers' work. Next, where they would recount the action, but there was no reason for that action. So the teacher explains that there are two types of peer pressure. The teacher does this, the teacher does this, the teacher does that. We coded as SD minus. Then we coded as SD plus, where there was both action and reason. And we'll talk about the yellow, blue, and green in a moment. So this is where there was an action and the student was inferring some sort of action, some sort of reason. The teacher used relatable examples, that's the action, so that students can make sense of the concept in their own life. There's the reason. And after going through some of the data, we actually found that that in itself did not reflect the full complexity of our data set, because we found there were examples of students where they didn't just say, the teacher does this because of that, but they were actually able to elaborate and explicate the teacher's practice in a very nuanced, sophisticated way. So this is an example. Her semantic wave starts low because she required the students to share their experiences. Then she builds complexity by giving other examples and so there was theory there. There was ethical principles. Sometimes there was specific contextual factors or specific nuances about learners, but there was some kind of principled reason. Not just she's doing this in order to that, but that there was some kind of explication or principled reasons underpinning what they did. Okay, so let's go on to a very, very short clip of a few minutes of the lesson so that you've got a context for when you start to see what the students have written, what they are actually talking about.
Tell me what a peer is. A peer, what's a peer? What do you understand about the word peer? Yeah.
A peer is someone in your age.
Oh, is she correct? Yes. Then let's give her a round of applause. Yes. Good. It's someone at your age. Do we all have peers? Yes. Oh, right. Then what do you understand by the word peer pressure? Yeah, boy?
I think peer pressure means when your peers tell you to do something that you know is wrong.
Oh, excellent. Let's give him a round of applause. Yes. Yes, when the people of your age are forcing you, they are pressurizing you, they want you to do something wrong, then that is called a peer pressure. Sometimes peer pressure is not always wrong. Sometimes it's right. If they say, let's go and study, let's go and play soccer, is that good or bad? Good. But if someone says, oh, let's go and steal, is it a good peer pressure? No. Yes, so sometimes it's good and sometimes it's bad. But today, then have you ever been in that situation where your peers force you to do something wrong?
My friend asked me to go and steal my mother's money.
Your mother's money? Did you do it?
No.
Oh, you were a good girl. Follow me as I read. Peer pressure, the effects of peer pressure. Your peers are people of your own age. Peer pressure takes place when people your own age force you or influence you to behave in a certain way. There is a word that follows. They tell us there are two words that explains us. What do they do? Yebo, Ndlovu?
Force or influence.
Yes, force or influence. Can you underline that word? Very good, Ken. The second one?
You need to feel accepted.
Good. Third one?
You need to be part of your audience group.
You need to be part. And lastly?
You need to fit in.
You need to fit in. Right. So what are we talking about here, boys and girls? What is this sentence talking about in the first part, yes? Peer pressure. So I want you to cut using either your pair of scissors or the ruler. Cut the word peer pressure quickly. We are given two things now in the end. Cause, yes.
That's bullying.
I said two last things that they make you do.
Start bullying and
Let's help her to read this word. Rebellious. All of you? Rebellious. Yes. So you cut bullying and you cut and then rebellious. Can you jungle those words together? To do what? To do what? To influence young people to do negative things such as sentence writing. Now, can you help me to fill in there? Can you do that? Oh, is it? Right, let's read. The sentence peer. So which word is that? Yeah? Can you take it quickly? Put it there. Quick, 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 quick. Young people to do what? Yep. Quickly, do what? Oh, yes. Are they correct? Yes. Wow. You are a very good class. Clap your hands for yourself. Yes.
Right, so this is one of our responses that we got, and I want you to have a look with me, and then just help me, you know, how you would have coded this. There we go. All right, so the lesson is about peer pressure and how peers can influence them to do something good or bad. The lesson is focused on students reading. Students underline the important words in the passage and answer the questions as they go along. The lesson is interactive as students answer questions asked by the teacher, and group work lets the students work together. The teachers check on each group. So what kind of reasoning of the teacher do we see? What kind of work of the teacher do we see in this response? How would you code it? Any ideas? I mean,
Ian, would you like to share?
Please. I can't see who's there. So you need to just put on your mic and contribute.
Well, I don't see any mention of the teacher anyway, so I would just say SD minus minus.
Okay, here's the teacher. There's a message. So the questions asked by the teacher. The teacher. Oh gosh, how do I get rid of this?
Hello, Pipit.
Sorry. There we go. So what do I want to do? Okay, so we've got the questions are asked by the, sorry, there we go. This is what I'm looking for. There we go. We've got something there where the teacher is asking questions. Okay, right. Is there any other place where the teacher is doing anything?
The teacher checks on the group.
Okay, there we go. So that was also, so those two we coded SD minus, but everything else is just focused on the students, and that we find was really prevalent in how the students were answering the lesson observation, especially the junior students, and especially before the teacher choices in action. They focused on what the kids were doing and what the activity of the classroom was doing. Let's just have a look through this one.
Lee, can I just ask a Shobha?
Yeah.
I'm actually just asking for assistance in understanding, you know, the text before the bits you've highlighted now. I also thought SD minus for the parts that speak to the teacher, but I'm wondering about whether it is in the way the task is given to the student teachers to respond, you know. So when they're paying attention to the fact that there's students, the lesson is focused on students reading, then is it not that that reading is being directed by the teacher? So I'm trying to get to they observing it, and I'm wondering whether it's the fact that they're not writing it in the way you are suggesting the word teacher happens is indicative that they're not observing that they're not understanding that the teacher is driving the process. So I'm just wondering about, what is the task that is being asked? And in other words, what is that instruction that is generating these responses? And to what degree then will that influence the way we're analyzing this information?
Yeah,
Thank
you
you.
know, Shoba, that's a very, very good question, because I mean, we are limited to what the empirical information that we've got in front of us says. What I would like to do is just pause that for a minute, because you're going to see later this exact same student, what he answered at the end, the exact same questions. So, but you know, any kind of response is a selection. You're focusing on certain things, and what are you focusing on? And at the start, this student, what he was writing about, whether he saw it in his head, I'm sure, but he was writing about what the kids were doing, what the kids were doing, what the kids were doing. I just want to triangulate with another study I did where about 40% of the students in our study initially portrayed teacher activity as babysitting work. We're there to look after the children and keep them safe while their parents are at work. And so the teacher was kind of a carer, making sure that the kids were safe, making sure the kids were behaving, but not seen as a knowledge worker, not seen as organizing a learning process in that study as well. And that was a very, very different study. So, you know, of course, we're limited to the empirical data that sits in front of us. But let's just have a look, because the instructions at the beginning and the end were identical. And so it's interesting to then look at shifts over time. Let's just have a look at this one. The teacher reads a short paragraph about peers and peer pressure, and then she instructs the learners to underline some words. Then she asks the students to cut those words. After cutting them, she instructs them to mix the words. Then she says that they should construct the sentences using the words. After that, then they did a spelling on the words. Then the teacher spells the words, the children write them down, and they check if they wrote it correct. Then the teacher pastes words on the board, and then the students should come to the board, write the meaning or the sentence of that word. The lesson was excellent. The teacher explained everything in such a clear way, and the students understood very well. Okay, so yes, there are parts, you know, where the teacher's work is not mentioned. You know, after this, they did a spelling on the words they cut. The students come to the board and write the meaning. So those are parts where the teacher's work is not mentioned. So the question here is, at what kind of level of semantic density do we see in this text, and where is the reasoning? If we start here, the teacher reads a short paragraph. So there's the action. After that, she instructs them to underline some words. There's a little bit of a reasoning here to use later in the lesson, but she asks the students to cut those important words. And what we're seeing here, when we started to code examples like this, and there were many, after cutting them, she instructed them to mix them, is that we're just seeing action after action after action with very, very little reasoning at all. She said that they should construct the sentence, the teacher spells the word, the teacher pastes the word on the board. There we have it. So lots and lots of different teacher action, but not the reasoning. And so we coded a lot of that SD minus. When we got to the reasoning, some of it was about just keeping children busy. Some of it was making them feel welcome, making them feel appreciated. And some of it was about doing things that would help the children to understand the concept of peer pressure better. So for that reason, we said, when we were coding, is the work mentioned? Is the teacher's work mentioned? No, SD minus minus. If there's an action but no reason, SD minus. If there's a reason, we need to ask what kind of a reason. What is the reason? To promote understanding of the content? Is it to promote participation in classroom activities, or is it to make the children feel warm and included in the classroom environment? And then we also asked, was it simply the reasoning was recognized, or was the reasoning elaborated and explained? So Shoba and others, you'll remember that first one that we spoke about. So this was his first lesson observation report. This was his second. And so Dale, do you want to take us through this one?
Thanks, Lee. I do apologize if I disappear. I'm just changing over to mobile data. As Lee said, this is that same student that we looked at a bit earlier. Oh gosh, Lee, won't you just pick it up? My whole screen has frozen.
All right.
Sorry.
Okay, no problem, Dale. So the teacher tests prior knowledge. There we go. They activate prior knowledge, hey, like we said in the previous one. And by asking the students what they understood by the term peer pressure. When the students did not understand, then what happened? Then the teacher corrected them. So there's the action, but here's the reason. You know, it didn't just happen all the time. It happened when the students didn't understand. So the question then for us was it a reason about knowledge? Was it a reason about being busy, or was it a reason about being welcome and warm? And I think that you're happy to say that that is a reason about understanding.
Yeah.
Okay, so we coded that SD plus. Over here, sorry, again, there was the action and here is the reason. And we coded that also SD plus. Hey, Dale?
Yes.
This provides support for learning. Again, another reason. The teacher did this and this is the reason why. Are you with us, Dale?
I am. I'm back. Thank you.
Cool.
Thanks. So the next sentence, she reads through the text with students, which provides support for those who do not understand. All right. So The action that's happening is reading through the text with the students, and the reason that she's doing that is to provide support for those who do not understand English. Now, the reason has to do with supporting those who do not understand. So it's to do with understanding and knowing. So we make that yellow. And it's SD plus, because the reason is given, but it's not they're not drawing on a specialized concept. All right. Then the teacher asks students if anyone had an experience about stealing, about peer pressure. So there's a teacher action. All right. And my screen has frozen again. Okay,
The student spoke about stealing money, so there's no teacher action mentioned in that sentence. So we code that one SD minus minus. Okay. This one would have been SD
SD minus.
SD minus. Sorry, minus. Right. There we go. Because there's an action, but there's no reason. The teacher used an experience to connect with the main topic. This promotes cumulative learning as the teacher focused on the main idea, connected experience and ideas.
So there we've got an action. The teacher's using the experience to connect with the main concept. And the reason is to promote cumulative learning. Now, cumulative learning, as you remember, was a specialized concept and idea that the students learned during the module. And it's to do with knowing and building up knowers. And we've coded as SD++ because they're drawing on this explicated formal theory to justify the teacher's actions. Students could transfer the knowledge to other situations. Okay, that's, there's no teacher action there. So it's SD minus minus. It's really just a statement about what happened. Then the teacher made use of feedback for students when they answered questions. So the action is making use of feedback, and the reason, the when, the what, why, the how, is when they answered questions. And that is also to do with knowing and understanding. So we would code that as SD+. There's a reason, but it's not a formalized, explicated reason.
So we see from over the course of a four-week period, a huge shift in almost ignoring the teacher completely in the first lesson observation to being very, very aware of the teacher's work and the reasons by the end of the lesson. So this was a first-year student. What I'd just like you to see very quickly is a fourth-year student, what they did at the end of the teacher choices in action. And all the blue words there were concepts that they had been taught during this module. The teacher begins the lesson by breaking down the complex concept of peer pressure into its parts, peer and pressure. She does this by engaging the class in a learning conversations. It appears that the lesson begins at a high point of a semantic wave, and then there's a downward shift, and the teacher's creating connections and so on. So this for us was an example where the student, by the end of that course, was SD++ all the way. Not just saying the teacher did this because, but actually talking about the teacher's practice in a very nuanced, very sophisticated way. They've got the concepts, they've got the language, and they're seeing teachers work. I'm just going to go on. Dale? Dale, are you there? Okay, so we took one
I'm here, sorry.
Oh, okay.
There's a storm rolling in and my internet always loses its mind when there's a storm arriving, sorry. So obviously we've now gone and analyzed a whole lot of students from the same cohorts, the same year of study and the same program at the same institution. And we've done that for a whole bunch of the participants. And we can start to see trends from how they were responding to the observation task at the beginning of the module and then at the end. So in the beginning of the module for this particular group, you could see that a lot of what they spoke about was just classroom happenings. The teacher was totally passive. They just listed a whole bunch of actions as per that first example that we looked at. And if the students gave reasons for the teacher's actions, they were not drawing on specialist ideas that they'd learned during their coursework. They were drawing on relatively simple ideas to justify the teacher's actions. Now, the same group at the end of the module showed incredible shifts. We saw that they totally stopped talking about random classroom happenings and they were focused entirely on what the teacher does and so much more focused on why the teacher does what the teacher's doing. As you can see with the dots, a lot more focus on how the teacher works with knowledge to make the knowledge accessible to the children and to develop the children as knowers towards the end of the module. And most interestingly, where the students are not only seeing reasons for the teacher's actions, they are able to make meaningful connections between the new ideas and the very powerful, useful ideas that they learned during the teacher choices in action module, and they can bring them to bear on the context of the observed lesson that they are watching. They're using these ideas to make sense of the classroom practice that they are observing.
Okay, so thanks so much, Dale. And what we see is even though we use things like semantic waves, autonomy tours, cumulative learning with Miss Flanagan's WhatsApp chat and Mark Wilmot's lesson on peer pressure, we see the students recruiting those concepts to talk about knowledge building in the lesson that they re-watch, the same lesson that they re-watch at the end of the teacher choices in action module. So our very, very preliminary findings. It seems, and we've got a lot more data analysis to do, but it seems that time alone in the classroom does very, very little to prompt a shift in the gaze from the kind of the giraffe to the elephant and back again. You know, we saw examples of students who'd spent quite a lot of time in the classrooms, up to 20 weeks, and they were still giving lesson observation reports at SD minus. In other words, the teacher does this, the teacher does this, the teacher does that, with very little insight into the logics of what the teacher is doing and why, and when they're doing it and when they're not doing it. The knowledge building through teacher education does have importance. And I think that the whole idea that shaping a gaze through conceptual means is a really, really fundamental thing, but it can be inert. if the logics of teacher reasoning are not noticed and are not pointed out, you know, to the student teachers. Learning through practice seems to open up possibilities for cumulative learning. In other words, possibly putting those parts of the teacher education program, which are taught as silos, putting them together and shaping the gaze of the student teacher as a prospective knower, or somebody who's learning to become a knower of teaching. The question that this raises is, does diverse context reveal something about the logic of teaching practices? You know, for 40 years, Schulman's ideas of PCK is that, you know, teaching history is very, very different to teaching English, which is very, very different to teaching mathematics and so on. And that is true. There are different things and different logics. But whether the students were able to see the commonality of practice, what the logics, and that they were being enacted in very different ways through seeing different examples of classroom teachers teaching in very different contexts. That's something that's worth thinking about. And finally, that legitimation code theory provided us with a very generative way of researching how these participants in our project see teacher thinking in action, and how they're writing about it in their lesson observation reports. And yeah, so that's where we are. There's lots more to come, but that's as far as we've got for now. Rita, sorry, you asked me, how important do you think that individual, sorry, I can't see the comment.
It says, how important do you think individual feedback on student writing was in terms of facilitating this improvement in how students responded to the lessons?
Okay. They were given feedback on 2 of their lessons, not on their first one. I think that they were given feedback on number 3 and number 5.
Yeah, it was 3 and 5.
It was 3 and 5. So sure, you know, interactions are shape gazes. We know about that. So certain of the institutions did have tutors giving feedback on 2 of the lesson observation reports, and others didn't. So others kind of just gave the, you know, put the students on the course and let them run with it. It's a very, very interesting question, and maybe we need to look at it as one of the variables that we've got in the data to come. Okay, thank you so much. Folks, every now and then, because of the way that this conference is set up, we're going to cut the Zoom link, and you're going to need to log in again. So I'm just telling you now that we're going to cut, and if you can just re-log in, put in the passcode, and then the session will carry on for the next 10 or so hours. Okay, thank you so very, very much.
Thank you, everybody.